Welcome, r/EntitledParents. My entitled mother tried to kill me. This is why I'm no longer in contact with her. I've posted a few stories about things my entitled mother has done, and why I no longer speak to her, and I've had some people say I should give her a second chance. Here's a list of the reasons why that will never happen. It's in sections, so it's easier for you to read. My sister will be referred to as C's. Played favorites and destroying my belongings at age 6. I first noticed my mother playing favorites, my younger sister who's 3 years younger than me, when I was 6 years old, Christmas 1996. My sister got all the big presents, and I got a few cheap bracelets and an ornament. My dad bought us rollerblades for Christmas that year, and the next day we were outside trying them out. My sister, 3 at the time, fell over and hit her head and began crying. My mother came out of the house and began screaming at me, assuming I pushed her, which I didn't. She wasn't hearing it though, and sent me to my room. A few minutes later she came into my room in a rage and smashed all of my belongings, including my Christmas presents. Half an hour later she came in and said, her words exactly, "Your room's a pigsty. Clean it up now." When I asked her about it the next day, she claimed to not know what I was talking about. Freaked out when I got my period for the first time. If you've seen the movie Carrie, you will understand what happened. My mother isn't as psychotic as Carrie's mum, and she's not religious, but she went really weird. She started asking if I'd had sex, how heavy it was, if I knew what it meant, but she wouldn't tell me, if I was ashamed of myself, and a lot of other weird questions. And every time I'd ask her to buy me pads, she never would. She'd just throw money at me and say she didn't want to know. And there were occasions when I had to ask my friends' mums for pads because my mum had no money or wouldn't spend her child support money on me because I'm not worth it. But if my sister wanted anything, she'd get it for her immediately. Wouldn't call an ambulance when I fell off a horse, but called one when the same thing happened to my sister. I was about 13 when this happened. My mum and my sister were really into riding horses, but I never was. But I was so desperate for my mum's approval that I started going to pony club with them. One day my horse got spooked by something and bucked me off. He was a really big horse. I almost landed on top of a barbed wire fence and was knocked out for a few minutes. I woke to my mother screaming at me, saying, "What the bloody do you think you're doing to stupid?" She didn't even help me up. A few months later the same thing happened to my sister, but this time my mother freaked out and came into the house screaming at me to get off my useless lazy ass and help my sister, while mum called an ambulance. My sister wasn't hurt. She'd fallen off a small horse onto a pile of dirt, but she was milking the attention for everything it was worth. She was taken to the hospital and didn't go to school for the rest of the week. Takes down my door because it made a noise when I closed it. When I was 12 I lost the privilege of having a bedroom door. The latch wouldn't click shut unless you gave it a harder push, and wouldn't swing open if it wasn't clicked shut. My mum refused to fix it. One day when I was closing the door so I could change clothes, it made a little too much noise for my mother's liking. She burst into my door screaming at me to shut the door up. Then she took out the hinges and took it away. From 12 until 14 I had no bedroom door and no privacy to change my clothes or sleep with the door closed. My sister and her friend broke into the school, but it was somehow my fault. This happened when I was 13. It was during school holidays and my sister and her BFF broke into the school and wrote out merit awards to each other, which was obviously a stupid idea and is how they were ought. After this happened I got the feeling that my mum was angry at me for what they'd done. This was confirmed many years later. The next story is a continuation to this. Admitted to my friend's mum how much she hated me. I always knew that my mum didn't like me, but the most I was ever told was that I was an accident and that she regretted having me. But I heard from my best friend's mum a few years ago exactly what my mum thought of me. My friend was over for a sleepover one weekend and my mum was talking to my friend's mum. These are some of the things my mum said. "I just can't believe that C's would do something like that. It's more of what Op would do. I'd never done anything that would give her that idea. I don't know why anyone would be friends with Opus. If I were in school I wouldn't be friends with her. Destroyed my belongings because she couldn't find the broom. This happened one summer weekend day when I was 13. My mum burst into my room and demanded to know where the broom was. I said I didn't know and I hadn't been outside all day. She accused me of hiding the broom and began throwing my belongings at me. In fear of my life, I ran out of the house and ran to the police station at the other end of town. This was in 2003 and I didn't own a mobile phone. When we got back to the house and the police asked her what happened, she put on her sweet and innocent face and said I don't know what she's talking about. She must be on her period or something. The policeman believed her and wouldn't hear my side of the story and he left. Her verbal abuse turned physical. Her abuse was mostly verbal and throwing things at me until I was 14. She started getting into these fits of rage over nothing. Couldn't find the remote equals a slap in the face. Got angry over nothing equals pushing me into a wall and throwing me and my sister out of the house. Couldn't find something to watch on TV equals punch me in the face, push me on the ground and kick me in the back. Her horse didn't win at the show equals my fault. Her car won't start equals my fault. Run out of money equals my fault. And the list goes on. She did this until I was 15, when I had enough. I warned her take one step further and you'll regret it. Needless to say, she regretted it. The glass jar smashed to the side of her face gave her the message. She never touched me again after that, and I moved in with my dad. Physically abused my autistic brother. I won't get into too much detail with this one, but I found out a few years ago that my mother used to rip chunks of hair out of his head and many other atrocious things. Wanted to turn off the life support when I was in a coma. When I was 17, New Year's Eve in 2007, I suffered a spinal cord injury and brain injury after falling off a roof. I was placed under an induced coma. My dad was with me the whole time, but it took my mum 3 weeks to come, even though her partner at the time could have paid to get her there sooner. All she knew was that I'd had an accident and was in a coma. She came with things to bury me with. My parents were given the option to turn the life support off. My dad said no, having faith that I'd pull through, but my mum said yes, and threw a tantrum when she didn't get her wish. So instead of burying me with what she brought, they were placed on my bed while I was in a coma. Rehabilitation was hard and traumatic, so I don't like talking about it, so I'll skip ahead to the next thing. Threw a tantrum after my dad told me. While I was in rehab after my injury, my dad let it slip that my mum wanted to turn the life support off on me. Up until this point, I didn't know this. I called my mum and told her I never want to see her again and that if I'm dead to her, then she's dead to me. Tried to steal money from her kids after our dad dies. In 2009 my dad and my uncle, his brother, died in a plane crash. I was 19, my sister 16 and my brother 22. My mother was there the next day to offer her support but nobody wanted them there. My entire family despises her. She started asking questions about the will and his assets. Information we didn't give her. We didn't know the cause of death for 3 weeks after his death, and lo and behold, she got nothing. The will was written before my parents had even met. The will gave everything to my dad's siblings and they gave it all to me and my siblings, so long as we promised that our mother got nothing. She's tried a few times in the past few years to get money from us, but we won't talk to her. I haven't spoken to my mother in about 7 years and I don't ever plan on seeing her again. She's a toxic person and life is better without her. My brother still talks to her from time to time but me, my sister and the rest of the family want nothing to do with her, and me and my sister are really close. She's not entitled, and I hold no resentment towards her. I love her to bits. Thanks for reading. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. If you would like to see more, feel free to subscribe.